Escaping from Eden, Chapter 3. Strange. I've seen that face before. This was a difficult rock wall to climb, as a fit 11-year-old Elo had the agility, with hands and feet small and strong enough to get a grip on the meager hand and footholds of the cliff face. 100 meters below, the rocks of the desert floor gave him reason not to slip. Above him, soldiers ballasted the rope strapped carefully around Elo's waist. The soldiers were in turn supervised by a bald-headed gentleman sporting a fine military mustache, a fashion must in the armies of Britain and the East India Tea Company. It was 1835, and the mustached man was an Englishman by the name of Henry Rawlinson. Rawlinson's official reason for being in this particular part of western Iraq was to help the Shah of Iran train his troops. But what he was doing on this day in Bahistun, dangling Elo over a cliff, was an attempt to reach an inscription carved into the stone of the cliff face. There was a reason the inscription was worth the effort. The Bahistun Inscription was a royal proclamation written in cuneiform script. Cuneiform is the world's most ancient form of writing, dating back 5.5 millennia. It was used until the 1st century AD, when it fell into obscurity. In the 1500s, it was rediscovered, found inscribed upon tens of thousands of clay tablets buried in various archaeological sites around the territories of ancient Mesopotamia. However, the secrets of the rediscovered cuneiform tablets were to remain locked up for the best part of 4 centuries. Kept under lock and key in various imperial museums, the tablets held on to their mysteries. Western scholars who analyzed them somehow failed to recognize the wedge-shaped markings of the cuneiform, etched by blunt reeds into the clay tablets, as being any form of script. The scholars took the markings as purely decorative, so it was that until the 1800s the cuneiform tablets remained mute, a bank of hidden treasure waiting for someone to find the key. The Bahistun Inscription was that key. What Elo carefully copied for Henry Rawlinson as he dangled on that rope in 1835 was a royal proclamation in 3 known languages, Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, all expressed in cuneiform script. It was the 3 known languages that provided translators with the key to unlocking cuneiform for a new world hungry for its secrets. Just like the Rosetta Stone was for Egyptian hieroglyphics, so was Bahistun Inscription the code breaker that gave a new era access to the heritage of a long-lost civilization. Suddenly, we had a window unto a forgotten world. Now, at this point, I should come clean and tell you that I made Elo's name up. That's because, unfortunately, in all the excitement of the day, Henry Rawlinson neglected to note down the name of the boy who made such an effort for world history. Elo is a Kurdish name meaning brave eagle, so I thought I would honor the brave young Absealer with that name. As the more than 200,000 tablets that had been unearthed began to be translated, we found we were gazing through portals into all kinds of aspects of Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian life. The tablets recorded legal notes, business agreements, banking arrangements, inventories, and shopping lists. But what really caught people's attention were the stories of beginnings. On the one hand, the explanation of human beings etched in cuneiform appeared quite foreign and bizarre, clearly the product of an unfamiliar thought world. On the other hand, some intriguingly familiar motifs began to reveal themselves. It is an uncanny exercise even today to read the transcripts and translations of these ancient accounts. It is like stumbling across a forgotten photo album of some distant relatives you hardly knew about. At first you feel like you're spying on something faintly comical. You laugh at the out-of-date fashions and the bad hair. You're spying on someone else's life, viewing snapshots of places and events that must have been meaningful to the original viewers, but which are wholly irrelevant to you. Then, from out of the blue, a face appears that you know, and then another, and another. Places and events that are part of your own family's story. What are the members of your family doing in this family's pictures? What's the connection? Is this when you realize there must be a whole lot of stories about your own family that you don't know? It gives you a funny feeling and leaves you wondering how much you really know about your own family. As I sat immersed in papers and reference books, translations and lexicons, the stone snapshots of the Mesopotamian tablets began to give me that same funny feeling. I began to wonder what I might not know about my own religious heritage. It was the same funny feeling that disturbed many good religious people back in the 19th century as these forgotten stories resurfaced, all predating the familiar canon of biblical accounts. In the cuneiform glyphs transliterating Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian accounts, some familiar motifs repeat. The stories of beginnings include the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, the Eridu Genesis, the creation of humankind, the debate between grain and sheep, the Babylonian and Assyrian, the 7 tablets of creation, and Enuma Elish, Tr. When in the Heights. All are found on tablets dating from around 3000 BC to 1100 BC. But the colophons, or the ancient authors' blurbs, tell us that even these ancient accounts are just the retelling of much older accounts. At first they make for quite dense reading. I wasn't reading modern prose. I felt that I was trespassing in the abandoned halls of a deeply foreign culture. But as I continued to read, I found myself gravitating to the gallery of familiar faces, places, and events. I wanted to know what the tablets had to say about them. This is what I found. In this summary account, I have favored the names used in the Sumerian versions of the stories. This is because Babylonian and Assyrian societies came later and are daughter cultures of the Sumerian culture. So although the oldest surviving copies of some of the stories that follow are found in Babylonian and Assyrian cuneiforms, their versions were developed from the older literature of their parent culture, that of the Sumerians. Hence, the Sumerian names are the older, original names for these characters. And he begins to read. Before the creation of anything is Anu, the source of all things. Earth lies in darkness. The salt waters and fresh waters, both birthed by Anu, must now be separated. These 2 bodies of water correspond to 2 powerful entities, Abzu, male, and Tiamat, female. Abzu and Tiamat bring forth other powerful beings who will collaborate in creating the world, beginning with light. There comes a time when the powerful beings fight among themselves for power and preeminence. The order of the council must be established and a CEO recognized. Enlil is installed in power. Enlil means air lord. The Sumerian word for god or gods is a glyph that indicates the sky. To get as near to the original associations as we can, I will be referencing them as sky people. In the beginning, earth is empty and barren, but the sky people create an enclosed zone within a region called Eden and fill it with animal and botanical life. The region the sky people have chosen is close to fresh water, including the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. Enlil now confers with his brother and first officer Enki. Enki means Earth Lord. Together they decide to create human beings. Enki will now oversee the human experiment. As he plans, Enki collaborates with Nama, the original Mama. One of the sky people defeated in the wars by Enki is Kingu. His DNA, carried in the medium of his blood, is now put into clay to generate the human beings. In the nursery, Enki partners with Ninhursag, the original nurse, who nurtures and nourishes the new humans into being. The very first human males live in the wild. They eat a vegan diet and live a subsistence life in harmony with the animals. The sky people now decide to modify the humans and take humanity to a new level. A female from among the sky people introduces the wild man to bread and beer and brings the humans into the cultivated zone where they are taught how to live civilized and how to cultivate crops. The sky people then upgrade the humans by creating the female of the species. This upgrade to human society brings with it a new self-awareness and sexuality and a higher level of consciousness. The humans now begin to wear clothes. These details, drawn from different stories among the cuneiform tablets, really caught my eye. They rang some bells, For instance, I had always noted that the writer of Genesis expects us to feel a delight and empathy when we read of Adam's original state of innocence, naked and living among nature in harmony with the animals. That empathy reflects in so many of the world's fables of human beings living in mythological times as one with nature and in a world where we and the animals could talk. I see this same deep feeling expressed by our children's delight in sharing their lives with toy animals and with pets. Might the deep feeling really be the vestige of a deep memory? It is a special part of Australian Aboriginal culture for males to go walk about. It is part of their initiation into adulthood and becomes a vital tool for balancing and recentering their lives. It is a ritual in which the young men respond to the urge to go out into the bush, to live alone in harmony with nature. Might this cultural practice resonate with feeling, also be the expression of a deep sense of memory? Then there is the resonant Western story, told by Edgar Rice Burroughs, in which civilized Jane finds an innocent Tarzan living wild and naked in the African jungle, in perfect harmony with the animals. She awakens his sexuality, teaches Tarzan to speak, civilizes the wild man, and brings him to the city. It's the same story. Rudyard Kipling tells the story of Mowgli, living innocent and naked in harmony with the animals in the jungles of India. He too is awakened and civilized by a beautiful girl who takes him to the village where he can learn to be human. Is the repetition and resonance of these stories no more than a coincidence? They repeat the same things of awakening, educating, and civilizing the wild man and bringing him into the village or city. As I read on, I was to understand that in the cuneiform's telling, there was a less altruistic motive behind upgrading the humans and bringing them into the enclosed zone. He goes back to the reading. Once in the city, the humans learn that they have been created to relieve the sky people of menial work, tending the crops, and keeping the sky people supplied with food. The humans are taught to harvest the crops and bring them to the sky people as sacrifices. For a while, this pattern works well, freeing the sky people to attend to other more specialized things. Enlil now divides the sky people into two groups. 300 are assigned to look after the earthly zone known as the Abzu. Another 300 will become observers who will watch and protect the earth from the sky, where Enlil has created stations for them among the stars. The main station among the stars is called Nibiru. Now, male and female, the human beings begin to procreate. As they multiply and produce families, the human population becomes noisier and more difficult to manage within the city. The council agrees that the humans are living too long and decide to limit the humans' lifespan. Troubling reports have reached the ears of the council. Human females have been abducted by people who are part human and part sky people. These new levels of hybridization create a sharp disagreement among the council. Enlil insists on a final solution whereby the earth will be purged of humanity by means of a massive flood. But not all the sky people are agreed. Enlil's first officer, Enki, has overseen the development of the humans and refuses to give up on the experiment. Enlil now goes in secret to warn one of his most trusted humans about the impending flood. The man's name is Ziusudra, and he is the king of Surupak. Ziusudra is the man's Sumerian name. He is Utnapishtim in the Babylonian version. Atrahasis is his Akkadian name. Ziusudra receives Enki's instruction as to how to construct a rescue vessel. He is to seal his family inside, together with a stock of plants and animals to reseed the various species and reboot the human race with the DNA of his extended family. Then comes the deluge. 3 times, Ziusudra releases a bird to look for land. When the third bird does not return, Ziusudra and his family know that the land has resurfaced. After the flood abates, the vessel runs aground on a mountain. Once on dry land, the animals reemerge, along with Ziusudra and his family, who make animal sacrifices to thank Enki for warning and saving them. In the aftermath of the deluge, the council confers over the regrettable violence of the flood. The council condemns indiscriminate killing and affirms personal accountability for wrongdoing. Some of the sky people suggest that animals taking the surplus human lives would have been preferable to the horror of the deluge. In a much later version of the story, recorded in Greek by the Babylonian priest Berosus, a voice then instructs Ziusudra to migrate east and establish a city in Babylonia. Goes back to the reading. In Babylon, the sky people engineer an incredible structure. A grand opening celebration is held, and a council of 50 is set aside to govern operations. From within the new structure, 7 technical experts dispatch the 300 observers to their stations in the sky. This is a particularly intriguing detail because in the parallel biblical account, the name of the structure, Babel, translates as gateway for the Elohim. If El is short for Elohim, Genesis 11 specifies that Babel has been constructed as a means of reaching the heavens. So here the cuneiform and biblical accounts serve to amplify and finesse each other. Today we would call the stations in the sky space stations and the sending structure a stargate. Admittedly, the touch points I have highlighted are only a thread within the Sumerian story. It would be fair to say that the sky people get up to a lot of activity in the cuneiform tablets that is not detailed in Genesis. On the other hand, a great deal of the extra activity of the sky people could be accurately summarized in terms of a number of biblical texts. Passages such as Isaiah 27:1, 51:9 through 10, Psalms 89:9 through 12, 74:12 through 14, Job 9:13 through 14, 26:12 through 13, Ezekiel 28, Luke 10, Revelation 12:7 through 17, all refer to the battles which pitch God against various mythological entities such as Leviathan, Rahab, Behemoth, and the dragon. Some writers have suggested that these are symbolic references to the enemies of Israel, Egypt, Babylonia, Assyria, and even the Red Sea. Or, as German theologian Hermann Gunkel suspected, they may be images and epithets of a more ancient lineage. The New Testament book of Revelation neatly summarizes the extra cuneiform storylines in 6 Greek words. And there was war in heaven. The war is around struggles for preeminence and the progress of the human race. Could these parallels really be no more than a coincidence? It is undeniable that the strange story of the cuneiforms has a great deal in common with the plural Genesis, i.e., Genesis translated with the plural Elohim. What does that parallel mean? Does it mean something, or am I wrong and Elohim is really just another more general name for Yahweh? To settle questions like these, is there any kind of proof, a smoking gun to show that this is that, and that before the flood human beings really did interact with other intelligent entities, sky people as I've called them in the tablets, and powerful ones as I've called them in Genesis? Once you have seen the similarities, it is impossible to just walk away from them. Either Genesis has retold the cuneiform stories, or Genesis and the cuneiform tablets are together recalling the ancient narratives known to both cultures. Given that Abraham and Sarah were already mature people when they left Sumeria, it would seem most logical that it is the narrative of Genesis that has recast the Sumerian account, which had also seeded the Assyrian and Babylonian versions. To some, this would seem a quite controversial claim. To others, though, it is taboo, because it appears to undermine the sense of divine authorship for the Bible. Even to shine a light on the parallels offends some devout believers. Nathaniel Schmidt found this to be the case back in the day when he was professor of Semitic languages at Colgate University in the United States. Schmidt was a Baptist minister who served at the university for 11 years, teaching courses in Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Coptic, Syriac, and many other ancient languages. It really was a scoop for Colgate University to have such an erudite scholar on its faculty. That is, until sometime in the 1890s when Schmidt began publishing papers that highlighted some of the parallels between the biblical and Mesopotamian stories of beginnings. By way of thanks for those particular papers, Schmidt found himself tried for heresy in 1895 and fired from his position in 1896. Nathaniel Schmidt's next publication was aptly a study titled Biblical Criticism and Theological Belief. Fortunately, the next turn in the road for Schmidt was a positive one as Cornell University jumped at the opportunity to gain a scholar of Schmidt's caliber. In fact, Cornell happily retained Schmidt as professor of Semitic languages for a full 36 years. Nevertheless, Professor Schmidt's experience stands as a sobering reminder that the development of ideas is not always a smooth or easy path, especially in the world of faith. Think Martin Luther. Think Galileo. Speaking for myself, I enjoy my work as a pastor, teaching and preaching from the Bible for faith groups around the world. I love teaching pastors and theological students the time-tested principles of hermeneutics, the tools by which we interpret text, and applying them to the Bible. How could I not enjoy the kudos of being regarded as both orthodox and thoughtful? And so, as the parallels impressed themselves upon me, I was not entirely sure how ready I really felt to follow in the footsteps of forebears like Nathaniel Schmidt or my friend Vince, the guy I mentioned from that heterodox sect. For that reason, I was eager to lean into the expertise of thinkers cleverer than myself to get my bearings. However, as I began to sound out academic friends as to their awareness of these parallels and what they made of them, a surprising logic began to repeat among friends who were mainstream Christians. No, my academic friends did not find the parallels disturbing. In fact, some were willing to state that it was blindingly obvious that the biblical stories of beginnings were based on the Mesopotamian stories. But if I asked the obvious next question, their faces would always fall. If I asked, so do you think the Mesopotamian accounts of sky people and how they engineered humanity are true? The answer was always along the same lines. How can they be? The Bible's versions of the stories are true. It's what the biblical versions are based on. That's false. That reasoning baffled me. The idea of a true story being developed from a false story isn't impossible, but something odd happens when faith is added into the mix. Interpretation aside, the Orthodox Christian believer accepts the authority of the Bible as a fundamental. Most Christian doctrinal bases denote the Bible as something like the supreme authority in all matters of faith and conduct. The Church of England's Articles of Religion declare that the Bible comprises those writings of whose authority was never any doubt in the Church. Once the parallels between the biblical and Mesopotamian mythologies are acknowledged, the position of faith then says that in order to view the Bible's accounts as true or authoritative, one must view the text on which they were based to be false. As reassuring as it may be to go with the flow of orthodox belief, I just couldn't get my head into that kind of logic. Surely that's like a historical figure being the descendant of a fictitious character. As to the idea that, thousands of years after their creation, the Mesopotamian account of origins could be corrected by someone who somehow knew better, it seemed to me this was an idea without roots in anything other than a pure assertion of faith. If we can accept that in Genesis we have a narrative that has drawn from the earlier Sumerian source, as relayed in the Mesopotamian tablets, then at some point we have to square up to the implications of the parallels between the Sumerian council of sky people and the Bible's council of powerful ones. Is it that the two sources draw from the same well of ancient memory? How can we be sure? Where will we find our smoking gun? For an illustration, imagine that your friend John owns a blue Toyota Fortuner. It has white leather seats, a leather dashboard glove, and a badge saying John and Judy. It's a car you're very familiar with, as you have ridden in it many times. Imagine that one day I take you for a ride in my new car. It's a Toyota Fortuner. You notice that just like John and Judy's, mine has white leather seats and a blue leather dashboard glove. Little details here and there convince you that I have stolen John's car. So you challenge me. Have you pinched my mate John's car? Of course not, I say, all innocently. Mine may look similar. Yes, it's got white leather seats and a leather dashboard glove, exactly like John's. But my Fortuner happens to be orange and the name on the badge is Paul. Am I telling the truth? Are they two different cars, or have I just really pinched John's car, had it resprayed and rebadged it? To settle the matter beyond doubt, you just need to locate the car's unique fingerprint, the vehicle identification number etched into the metal. That's the smoking gun you would need to find. If the powerful ones of the Bible and the sky people of the cuneiform tablets are the same and not similar by coincidence, then presumably Yahweh is a separate entity whose self-revelation has been interwoven with the stories of the powerful ones. For our smoking gun, we need to look no further than the book of Joshua 24:14. In this passage, Joshua gives a speech to persuade the people of Israel to entrust themselves to the entity who revealed himself to Moses in the desert as Yahweh. Joshua has succeeded Moses as leader following Moses' death. He addresses the people in these words: "Now, therefore, follow Yahweh and serve him in sincerity and truth. Put away the Elohim, the powerful ones, whom your ancestors served on the other side of the river and in Egypt, and serve Yahweh. Today make up your minds whom you mean to serve, the powerful ones whom your ancestors served beyond the river, or the powerful ones of the Amorites in whose country you now live. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh." The time in Egypt speaks of the Israelites' time enslaved within a foreign religious culture before Yahweh revealed himself to Moses. On the other side of the river refers to the religious culture of Abraham and Sarah's roots in Sumerian Mesopotamia. Joshua 24:2 clarifies this. "Since the time of memory, your ancestors, right up until Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived on the other side of the river and served powerful ones, i.e., other plural Elohim." Joshua calls his people to reject the Egyptian and Sumerian Elohim, tear them off is his phrase, and give all their allegiance to Yahweh. Here is an instance when Elohim and Yahweh clearly cannot be equated. Here Elohim is a plurality of powerful ones whom we are not to worship. They are the sky people of Abraham's Sumerian heritage, whose stories are told in the cuneiform tablets. Joshua calls the people in God's name to disregard them, reject them, and cut them off. For me, this is the smoking gun. Every point of correlation between the sky people and the powerful ones and their respective storylines constitutes another digit in that vehicle identification number. Joshua's speech unambiguously connects the two mythologies. Escaping the Sumeria was an escape from the sky people. In the same way, escaping Egypt was an escape from subjection to the ancient Egyptian regime, including the influence of their powerful ones. Now aided and led by Yahweh, the children of Israel could be free. If the Sumerian and Egyptian cultures and the plural Elohim narrative all recall subjection of human beings to sky people or powerful ones who are not God, then we have to ask ourselves who or what the sky people or powerful ones are exactly. What kinds of entities would be present and interacting in the prehistory of the human race? One possible clue can be found among the shopping lists, legal documents, and inventories of the cuneiform tablets. The King's List refers to tablets recording the reigns of Sumerian kings going back through history to beyond the time of the deluge. These lists would make for unremarkable reading except for one detail, the dates. Among the more recent reigns recorded, we read of incumbencies of anything from 6 to 36 years. But as we go back further through history, something anomalous appears. Out of the blue, we find a dynasty that lasted 24,510 years, 3 months, and 3.5 days. That's a very precise number. It is a precision we would expect of the Sumerian culture, the culture that pioneered the mathematical model that gave us the second. However, it's the next sentence that blows the picture open. The 24,510 years, 3 months, 3.5 day dynasty was divided over no more than 23 kings. That's a mean tenure of more than 1,000 years each. Those kings would have been older than Methuselah, the longest lifespan recorded in the Bible. The dynasty concluded by the Great Flood was one of 241,200 years, divided by 8 kings. That's an average reign of 30,000 years each. Comparing the longevity of these impossibly long-lived kings with a normal human lifespan is like comparing a human lifetime with that of an ant. So what is this? It presents as nothing more than a dry, clerical catalog of dates recorded for posterity, chiseled into stone tablets without any comment, fable, poem, hagiography, or song to lend these dates any other layer of meaning. A record that just happens to include kingly reigns ranging from 6 years to 36,000. Of course, it's tempting to disregard these anomalous lifespans as if the Sumerians were either rather vague or just a bit careless in their concept of time, except that these were not people who were vague about time. Today we divide time precisely into seconds, minutes, and hours because the Sumerians invented a model for dividing time and space which was to provide us with seconds and degrees. Today we are able to use the precision of mathematics to perform our calculations because the Sumerians invented it. Perhaps we ought to give their culture a bit more credit when it comes to their understanding of time. Similarly, it was the Sumerians who produced a script which could transliterate countless languages and record their literature for posterity. So we should certainly give the Sumerian scribes credit for the ability to translate terms. The Babylonians used Sumerian mathematics to measure and record the cuneiform script, a timed account of a solar eclipse, with such precision that today scientists have been able to use their account as a means to calculate the deceleration of the Earth's rotation in the time sense. All in all, we have to rule out any idea that we are reading a litany of lazy math from people to whom time meant nothing. The Sumerians' connection with the stars may give another layer of meaning to these dates. Some researchers note correlations between the timelines of the kings and the period of Earth's precession, the period of its wobble, resulting in a cycle of equinoxes. Other scholars note that some kings have been listed consecutively who, according to the Sumerian history, ruled as contemporaries on the thrones of different capital cities. So there may be more going on with these dates than immediately meets the eye. Another detail worth noting is that the kings list asserts that it is carefully cataloged reigns from the time of the kingship descended from the heavens to the time of the flood, and then once more the kingship descended from the heavens. The concept by which monarchy begins with gods, who later bequeath the regency over to human kings and queens, is not the monopoly of Sumerian culture. The Egyptians had it too. Within this enigmatic succession, transitioning from sky people to humans, there is a famous crossover king, King Gilgamesh, a hybrid of human and sky people. He is the hero of the oldest written story of the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So when, in April 2003, a German-led research team announced it had found King Gilgamesh's tomb, it was an incredible moment in the history of religion and archaeology. Not much more than a month after the first U.S. invasion of Iraq under George H.W. Bush, a research team led by Jörg Fassbender of the Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich announced the incredible discovery they had made. With scarcely contained excitement, Fassbender spoke to the BBC and said, "The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by the Epic of Gilgamesh. We covered more than 100 hectares. We have found garden structures and field structures as described in the Epic, and we found Babylonian houses. Very clearly, we can see in the canals some structures showing that flooding destroyed some houses, which means it was a highly developed system. It was like Venice in the desert." By differences, the magnetization in the soil, you can look into the ground. The difference between mud bricks and sediments in the Euphrates River gives a very detailed structure. I don't want to say definitively that it was the grace of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the Epic. We found just outside the city, in the middle of the former Euphrates River, the remains of such a building as could be interpreted as a burial place. Potentially, it was one of the most significant archaeological finds ever. Once the find had been located and cordoned off, the First Iraq War ended within a matter of days. What a find! A truly unique opportunity to study the intersection of mythology and history by opening up the burial place of the world's oldest mythological hero. How incredible it would be to examine King Gilgamesh, revered as a demigod. It would provide an unimaginable insight into the world of the Sumerian kings and a key to interpreting the King's List. Sadly, it appears that the public investigation of the site was quickly interrupted. In 2005, Fassbender wrote rather mournfully in the scientific journal Dossier, Archéologie et Sciences des Origines. To translate it from the French text, Fassbender had this to say about the find. Contrary to what some journalists have claimed, it isn't at all proven that our find corresponds with Gilgamesh's under-river tomb. We are sorry not to be able to give a more precise idea of the results of our magnetic investigation, but since 2003, all the archaeological sites of Iraq have been under a serious and growing threat. The lack of security in the country and the trafficking of art and artifacts are causing the total and irreversible destruction of archaeological sites by looters. All archaeological structures will be better preserved if we leave them under the ground, untouched and buried. Buried? What a shame. I suppose if Jorg had written this update after the second Iraq invasion, he could have added, ISIS is the reason that the site either couldn't be investigated or had been already destroyed. How unbelievably disappointing that even in the 15 years since its discovery, for a find so uniquely important, we haven't been able to guard it or go back for a second look. For the long time being, we will have to consider the Sumerian King's List as holding on to its mystery for a little longer. As to its longer-lived kings, we can say that the list portrays beings who, though long-lived, were not immortal as we would conceive gods to be. Who were they then? Let's review some of the details related by the cuneiform tablets. By any reckoning, the sky people are powerful beings. Think about the space stations, the Stargate, the sky people who come down from the heavens, terraform barren land, manipulate weather systems, and genetically engineer human beings. They are long-lived but mortal. They use technology, get into politics, break rank, battle for power, argue, experiment and invent, observing, sometimes helping, at times abducting, and exploiting human beings. I would suggest the tablets paint a pretty clear picture. The sky people are what today we would call extraterrestrials. By the time my thinking reached this point, I needed to get out of my shipping crate and go and find some older, wiser people who could orient me in the world that suddenly comes into focus once you've taken the red pill of history, meaning the cuneiform tablets. I needed to hear from some experts from outside the realm of literature, out in the tangible flesh and blood world of history, people who deal with empirical things, archaeologists and paleontologists, and perhaps an anthropologist or two. Perhaps I could find a proper scientist to reassure me that humans are just humans living comfortably alone in the universe, or to brace me for the alternative. This journey was about to take me out of my seclusion, beyond the state of Victoria, and out of Australia. Indeed, out of all my comfort zones, and all around the world on a paradigm-shifting voyage of discovery. But first, I needed a beer. That is the end of Chapter 3. Peace and blessings to you all.